Hey, I'm Sage Plays. Welcome to Bellemont Zoo. Today we're going to be building something that we've never been able to build before, a realistic Gibbon Island. Now we're in sandbox mode, there's a whole load of tricks we can use. Let's go. Back in episode 1, we built our penguin habitat at the front of the zoo. Later we built the huge Madagascar house behind it, and ever since then, this area between has been empty, so today we're going to finish it. According to the Lar Gibbon care manual, the recommended size for a Gibbon Island is 30 metres by 7 metres, so we're going to measure that out here. And there should be an off-show area of at least 1.6 by 2 metres per gibbon, and the water surrounding it needs to be at least 5 metres wide in order to prevent them from being able to jump off the island and escape. And again, according to the care manual, that water needs to be 9 metres deep. So I measured out 9 metres deep and thought, that can't be right. Gibbons are about 1 metre tall. What is going on? So I checked a care manual for a different species, and they give it as 0.9 metres deep. So I guess the Lar Gibbon care manual has a typo in it. So we're going to go with 1 metre deep, 5 metres wide, and then surround the whole island with these blue blocks just to represent where the water's going to go. And then once we finish putting this little template for the habitat together, we'll move it into position and then start creating it for real. So we're going to move it back so that it sits just behind the penguin house and next to the Amazon to Andy's house. You can ignore that little holding pen in the top, that's going to get removed. And there we go. This is going to sit to the left of this path, and on the right we've got our beautiful lawn, which we'll do a bit more work on later as well. Time to start building. The main inspiration for this habitat is the Gibbon Island at Tiergarten Schönbrunn in Vienna. It's a really nice one, and it's a good size for the space that we've got available here. So the first thing we're going to do is build the island itself. So we're going to take these pieces from the tropical pack, which are great because they've got the 3 different colours that you can change, so we can get a slightly greener look to the bit at the front, which sits just above the water, and then a more usual kind of concrete colour for the rest of it. That's going to sit this in really nicely once we've got the water in, and then we're just going to use this piece and the smaller version of it when we're doing the corners so we can get things nice and smooth. And we're just going to create a fairly organic shape that matches the template that we created, just with a bit more of an interesting shape to it, a few more curves. You can see we're getting a nice sinuous shape already, and by using this smaller piece we can get the curve at the end of the island a lot smoother than if we were just going to use the large piece. And then we can start looking at the water. First up, we want to see where the water level is, so we'll dig a little hole here and then we will just fill it with water. And now we can go in and see exactly where the top of that water is. There's the water level there, so our island's quite a lot higher than that. We want it to be just kind of peeking out of the water, so we'll take the island and move it down so that the lip at the top is just above the water, and you can still just see the indentation beneath it. So let's get it to exactly the right position. There we go. Looking good. Now we can put the moat in properly. So as we've discovered, we need just over 1 metre, or just under 1 metre really, of depth to keep them in. So we'll measure out 1 metre with this piece here, and then we'll dig the terrain down so it's just underneath it. And now we can dig out the whole moat using the flatten to surface tool, completely surround the island with it, and then we'll use those same tools again to put some land back in just above the level of the island. Don't worry about all the jaggedy bits around the edges, we will smooth those out and cover them up later on. And then we can put the water in, and by changing it to a dark green and reducing the transparency, we can get a really realistic look to it. That's almost it. Let's just tweak that a tiny bit more. There we go. That is the basics of the island. Looking really good already, so let's get some foliage in. And this is where we're going to start doing some of the things that we can do in sandbox mode that we can't do in franchise mode. So one of the issues that we had with the Gibbon Island at San Bernardino Zoo that we built was the land requirements for the gibbons are huge, despite the fact that IRL gibbons basically spend their entire lives up in the trees. There's really no need for them to have a large ground area. And the second problem was that they spend so much of their time in Planet Zoo on the ground instead of climbing. So what we're going to do is cover the entire land on this island with sunken trees. It's going to look like foliage, give us a really nice bright green look with a few bits of darker green mixed in, and that is basically going to destroy the traversable area on the island, which forces the gibbons to spend the vast majority of their time on all the climbing that we're going to build for them later. With the trees in, we're going to sort out the join between the concrete and the substrate using the periwinkle leaves. Remember when this was the only piece in the game that looked like grass? Used to use this in every habitat we ever made, but it's been a long time since we've used it. Really brings to mind what I was seeing when I was at Tiergarten Schönbrunn at the edge of this island. So we're going to use it here. Good to see it back again. We're also going to use some of the grapevines as slightly lower bits of shrubbery at the edges of the island, and chuck in a few arrowwood bushes as well. That's the basics of the ground cover done. Before we move on to the next stage, we need to quickly check somewhere else in the zoo. Over at our Ocelot aviary, you can see we now have standoff barriers present and correct in front of the aviary and surrounding it. Thanks to all of you who pointed out in the comments that with an Ocelot in here, we should have a standoff barrier. This is just one of the European fences, recolored and sunk down a bit. I think it looks really good. Let's get back to the Gibbon Island. Onto the climbing. This is really important. We want the gibbons to be climbing pretty much all the time that they're in this habitat. So what we're going to do is start making custom trees and then all sorts of other climbing for them so they can use this to get across the whole of the island and in and out of their little house that we're going to build for them without having to get onto the ground. So I've gathered together loads of the climbable pieces, pretty much all of the natural looking climbable pieces in the game, and we're going to start making our own trees for them to climb on. So we're going to try and make this look as much like real dead trees as possible, and then it can be mixed in with some logs and all sorts of other things. The habitat at Schönbrunn combines live trees, dead trees, and then arrangements of logs and things like that, and loads of ropes to get them all about the island. It's always really tricky to do this in Planet Zoo because the branches that we have all look really different to each other. We've got a load of pretty big branches that look good together, and then we've got the climbing branches. There's 4 of them, 4 different sizes, but they all look completely different, all from completely different trees. It is really difficult to get something that looks good, but we're going to do that today, mainly using the African branches from the base game actually, which is what we've got here. But you can see the issue already here. They're all pretty large. It's hard to get realistic branches coming off of the main trunk. There's a few things that we can do to sort that out. Firstly, we're going to make the main trunk of the tree a bit thicker by combining 2 of these pieces together and just rotating them and moving them into place. And then we're going to combine it with the dead yellow Ipe tree. Ipe, I don't know how it's pronounced. I'm going to say Ipe. And that gives a good trunk and starts to make the rest of the branches look realistic. And we end up with a completely climbable dead tree, which is great. Next we're going to start putting in the live trees. So we've got a larger one on the left, and then I've got this Sudanese frankincense tree on the right. Really like it, but it's nowhere near tall enough. So we'll extend the trunk using the climbable log, and then we'll cover the whole thing in ivy. All the trees at the real habitat are covered in ivy, which is very useful when you are combining loads of different trees and sticks and logs together to make new trees, because all the joins can be covered up. Now we've got a few good looking trees in there, we can start putting in some of the extra climbing like logs and things like that that will connect up the various trees so they can traverse the entire habitat without ever having to go down to the ground. So we're going to put a log in here, and then we'll position another one underneath it and just start getting a really basic little climbing frame together. Don't worry that it's floating in midair, we'll join it up with the ground a bit later on. Just want to make sure this is at a good height for viewing for the guests, and then we can start putting more copies of the tree that we made in, putting some netting in for them to sit in, and then making sure everything joins together and looks nice and natural. We'll have a tree at each corner of this netting, and then we'll put a second set of netting in as well. I'm not worried about making sure the climbing works at this point. We're just getting something that looks good, that I know will be somewhere in the region of working properly once we get the gibbons in here, and then when it's finished we can add the gibbons and do any adjustments necessary to make sure it all works. And we'll get as many different pathways through here as possible. So with a couple of gibbons in here and 3 once they've bred, then there should be lots of different ways that they can get about the habitat, and we'll get lots of excitement and things to look at in here. Another issue we had with the Gibbon Island at San Bernardino Zoo is it was so huge, and you can only keep gibbons in pairs, maybe with a juvenile if it's one of theirs as well. They don't live in large groups, they're not happy in large groups. So if you build a massive habitat for them and you've only got 2 or 3 little monkeys in there, or apes I should say, then there's going to be a lot of time where there's basically nothing happening in the habitat. So building a smaller one like this is going to make for a much more dynamic habitat. Now, where are these 2 ropes going to lead? These are going to lead into their indoor habitat, so let's start building that. We need a very specific building for this because this is going to join directly onto the island. They need to be able to get in and out of here. We need a building that basically they cannot climb. We need something where we can get them in and out of the building, but the walls are sheer and unclimbable, so they're not going to escape. So we're going to have a really tall building made mostly out of glass with some wooden beams. This is very similar to what they actually have at Tiergarten Schönbrunn, but I've replaced the metal parts of the structure with wood. I guess it'd be wood cladding in real life over the metal. Just makes it a bit more attractive and makes it sit more nicely into the habitat. We'll use these new pieces from the America's Animal Pack to create the part where the glass will join onto the wood so that it looks like it's securely fastened. We're going to build one huge sheet of glass using this glass pane here, which is FlexiColor. You need to turn the colour down a bit to get it nice and see-through. And then we'll start building separate viewing windows in with these pieces of wood. Building it this high not only makes it look impressive, it also means that the guests will be able to see the gibbons climbing on the inside of the habitat as well as on the outside part. We're going to put some window panes in at the top. These kind of do double duty. They let air into the building, but also they prevent the gibbons from being able to jump up onto the roof when they're on the ropes that are going to lead into this building. So we'll copy these across here. These are just some of the thin glass panes, and then we'll use some of the European cast iron fence post to make them look a bit more solid and more like actual windows that are coming out of the wall. Got another little piece there just to act as a support. Again, we'll use that new piece from the America's Animal Pack to tie everything together. And there we go, we've got one panel of building, and we're going to use this to make the entire building. It's going to be a really simple building, and it's essentially going to be rectangular, but not quite. So it'll look like a rectangle, but it'll actually follow the path that you can see going past the building here, and it will follow the fence on the other side. So it's going to be thicker at the end that the gibbons come into it than it is at the other end, but it will just follow seamlessly along next to the path and give the guests a great view wherever they're stood. There we go, you can see the basic concept there. Let's get on to the fun bit, which is getting the gibbons in and out of the building. We've got separate smaller glass pieces at the front of the building here in order to leave an opening in the middle. And now we're going to slide one of the PVC doors into the opening so that the gibbons can get in and out through this part here. Because they're going to be climbing on these ropes rather than walking on the floor, that means their hitboxes will be much smaller, so we don't actually need a massive 4x4 meter door here. We can make this into two much smaller doors and they'll still be able to get in and out. Speaking of doors, we're going to use the backside of one of the Planet Zoo doors to fill the gaps in there. Just gives us a nice neutral kind of black that will fill that in. And later on we'll add some more decoration on there, give it a bit more of an Indonesian flavour. This isn't a highly themed habitat, as you've probably noticed. We're letting the natural trees and the water make it look nice and lush. We don't need giant Balinese temples everywhere or anything like that. It should look really nice just with all the vegetation. We'll join the entrance to the rest of the habitat with some climbing platforms to make sure they can get in and out, and then we can do some decorating. So we're going to use some of these bark panels to give them a bit of privacy and prevent the entire building from being glass-sided. And then we're going to place a load of logs in the gap behind the habitat and all the off-show areas that you can see behind it, just to start screening in out that view. We'll put loads of them in and have each one at a slightly different height. Just gives a slightly abstract but natural looking barrier, which we can also fill in with hedges and bamboo, so that the island becomes the focus and you're not distracted by the buildings behind it. And once the bamboo's in, we'll move on to the finishing touches to make sure this whole thing is as beautiful as possible, starting with some reeds and using that little trick we did in the ocelot habitat with this Cecropia sapling to make some new kind of plants that will join the water onto the land. I also noticed there was some sort of grating under the water. You've always got to make sure that in the very unlikely event that a gibbon actually fell into the water, they're going to be able to climb back out again. So there's lots of things like this just under the surface of the water, along with branches that extend from the water onto the land, so if any of them did fall in, they could climb back out again. So we'll bury this under the water, and we're going to shade it green slightly just to further sell the effect that it is under the water. We'll put some dead leaves in, and then we'll move on to the guest path. I've copied the edge of the island across to the edge of the path, so we've got a continuity there and it doesn't just suddenly disappear into the water, and we'll use some of the pathing we created for our South American area. That fits in really nicely here, and then we'll drop in some Indonesian style wood pieces just above the gibbon mural that I've made there. Like I said earlier, no crazy theming, it just makes things look a little bit nicer, and we'll do something similar at the front. We're going to take this Indonesian piece, make the colouring a lot more subtle so it blends in nicely with the backs of those doors, just to give a little bit of an Indonesian flavour to it. And then finally, we'll put the enrichment items in, making sure all of them are on the island. The keepers can't get onto the island, which means they will put all the food in the building, which means that the gibbons will constantly be going from the island to the building, and that is the Gibbon Island complete. Let's take a look. Here we go. A few of Lion's signs in, as always. This is looking really lush. Pretty happy with that building as well, considering how simple it is. Let's get the gibbons in. I am so happy that entrance works. I can't believe they can get in and out of there. It's a shame they always run on top of the ropes. I spent so long filming this trying to get some brachiation on there. They will brachiate throughout the rest of the habitat, but for some reason not on that rope there. You can see our female just swinging around up here. We have a blonde male. I was really happy to get two completely different colours considering we're in sandbox mode. Let's check them out in full motion. That looks so cool. This will be one of the first things you see in the zoo, depending on which way you come through the entrance. I've done some tidying up on the lawn as well, so that finally looks as it should. Put a cherry blossom tree in there. It looks really nice there. Thank you so much for watching as always. Thank you to everyone who's joined the Explorers Club. Hit the join button on the channel if you want to see your name up here, and I'll see you again next week for some more Planet Zoo.